All right, so welcome back, everybody. And today we'll be talking about unemployment. So we've already talked about GDP, and GDP is one of the main indicators that economists use to determine how well an economy is performing. Unemployment is another one of those key indicators that we can use to look at the health of the macroeconomy. So GDP was all about production, seeing how much an economy is producing or consuming. And the reason unemployment is also very important when we're assessing the health of an economy is because unemployment tells us how many people are working and therefore how many people are producing. So it's a good metric of how productive our labor force is. So when we talk about unemployment, we're looking at the labor market. And thinking back to the circular flow model, we know that households are supplying firms with the factors of production. So the factors of production being things like land, labor, capital. Households are selling their labor to firms, and firms are buying this labor and it's being used to produce goods and services. So in the labor market, households are the suppliers. This is kind of turned on its head from the way that we normally think about markets for goods and services. So households are the suppliers, and firms are the buyers, and we think of the wage as the price per unit of labor. So if you're working a job where you're paid an hourly wage, that a wage that you receive is the price for 1 hour of your labor. All right, so our first step when we're talking about how to define unemployment is to look at the population of all potential workers and divide them up into different categories. So when we're talking about all potential workers, we're usually talking about all people who are 16 and over. So, we don't think of children as being part of the working population, but here in the US, if you're 16 or older, you're able to work with little to no restrictions. So all potential workers for us will be adults age 16 and over. So then we'll split this group up into three different categories. The first is those who are employed. So people who are employed is anyone who's working for pay. Next is our unemployed category. This includes anybody who's not working and they're also looking for work. So this is any person who isn't working but wants to be working. And our last group is those who are not in the labor force. And these are any people who are not working and also not looking for a job. So this could include adults who are staying home and taking care of children or other family members. This would also include retirees. So anybody who is of working age who is for any reason not looking for a job. So this could also include, people my age who are just for whatever reason not interested in working. So to illustrate this point, I've drawn a little diagram here. So this largest oval represents our total population. And then this smaller oval contained in it is the adult population. So everyone who's left out of the adult population over here would be children. And then, as we said, we're splitting up our adult population into three groups. This large portion here is our employed group, anyone who's working for pay. This small section here is our unemployed group, those who are not working but are looking for work. And lastly, we have the group that is not in the labor force. So any adult who does not have a job and doesn't want one. All right, so now that we've talked about how economists divide up a population when discussing unemployment, we're going to look at the three key formulas you'll need when generating unemployment statistics. So first up, we have the labor force, and the labor force is just the total number of workers in an economy. So to calculate the labor force, we just add up the employed group and the unemployed group. And as we saw earlier, everyone left over is just not in the labor force. So our labor force includes unemployed and employed. Next, we have the unemployment rate, and this is just the percentage of working age adults that do not have a job but are currently seeking one. And so in order for us to calculate the unemployment rate, we take the number of employed people and we divide it by the total number of people in the labor force, everyone who's participating in the labor market, and we multiply that by 100% to report our statistic as a percentage. And lastly, we have the labor force participation rate. You'll see this abbreviated as LFPR. It's just easier. And the LFPR is the percentage of adults who are choosing to participate in the labor market. So as we said earlier, the labor force is made up of everyone who is employed and unemployed. So these are people who are either working or people who are not working and want to work. So that group is everybody who's choosing to participate in the labor market. So when we look at the labor force participation rate, this is just telling us out of all of our adults who are considered working age, how many of them are actually choosing to participate in the labor market. So to calculate LFPR, we'll take our total labor force and divide it by our total working age population. And again, multiply this by 100% to report the statistic as a percentage. Later on in the video, we'll go through some practice problems where we get to use these different formulas. All right, so next up, we're going to talk about the different types of unemployment. But before we do that, I want to mention the concept known as the natural rate of unemployment. So in any economy, we'll never have zero unemployment. Our unemployment rate will never be zero. This is just not possible, as we'll see when we look at the different types of unemployment, it'll make more sense. But for most countries, they're shooting for a natural rate of unemployment around 5% or lower. Generally, if the unemployment rate is below 5%, we can say the economy is doing decently well based on this one metric. All right, so our first type of unemployment is cyclical unemployment. And this is any deviation in the unemployment rate that is caused by expansions or contractions of the economy. So, an expansionary period for the economy is a time when the economy is growing. And when firms see that the economy is growing, they feel more positive and they will seek to expand their business during that time. So, this will make firms more willing to hire on new workers, and this can reduce the rate of unemployment. On the other side, if the economy is entering a recession or if businesses are expecting a recession, this will make them, more cautious. They're not going to be as willing to hire on new workers, or they may even let go of workers, which would cause an increase in the unemployment rate. Our second type of unemployment is frictional unemployment, and this is just the unemployment that occurs as workers are moving between jobs. And this is not necessarily a bad thing because as employees leave one job and they're looking for the next, they want to find a job that suits them. So when you're applying to jobs, going through interviews, all of that, you're looking for a job that matches your wage expectations, your skill set, all of those things. So the time spent in frictional unemployment is not necessarily a bad thing because both workers and firms want to find that good match. Another factor that can, play into frictional unemployment is the time and cost it takes to move. So if I got a new job in New York, it's not like I can just pack up and move there tomorrow. I need to handle my living arrangements, find a new apartment, pack up all my stuff, move it. So the time that it takes to move before I can start my new job would also be factored into frictional unemployment. And lastly, we have structural unemployment, and this is unemployment that occurs because individuals lack the skills that are currently valued by the labor market, or because the labor market has moved away from the skills that these workers do have. So, a great example of this is now when you go to the grocery store or you go to Target, Walmart, wherever, we see a lot of self-checkout kiosks. And these self-checkout kiosks have eliminated or greatly reduced businesses' need for cashiers. So it's replacing the skill set that's needed by a cashier with technology. One of the greatest defenses against structural unemployment is known to be education. And this is because workers who are educated have an easier time retraining their skills. So if I was a cashier and that's my skill set, I'm, good at scanning products, counting change, all of those things, and then I get replaced by a self-checkout kiosk, I I need to readapt. I need to learn new skills to get into another job in the labor market. So having an education can help to just readjust and adapt to new skills more quickly. All right, the next thing I want to quickly touch on is how the government can intervene to either reduce unemployment or unintentionally increase unemployment. So there are some programs that governments can put into place to help reduce the natural rate of unemployment. One of these being job agencies. So these are agencies that are designed to help match workers into jobs, and this can help to reduce the rate of frictional unemployment. And second would be any sort of training programs. So the government can provide retraining programs for individuals who may have lost their job or training programs that help individuals build new skills. And this can help to reduce the rate of structural unemployment. Now, another program that governments provide that are designed to, help support individuals who are unemployed is unemployment insurance. So if you lose your job, you're entitled to receive a portion of your income for, a set number of months, and this is just designed to help keep you afloat while you're on that new job search. The potential consequence of this, not always the case, but if your unemployment benefits are good enough, it can reduce the incentive for you to quickly find a new job. So, for example, if I lost my job and I'm receiving really good unemployment benefits, I'm not going to accept a new job that would pay me less than I'm currently receiving from unemployment. So, in this case, the unemployment benefits could actually encourage me to stay unemployed for longer. All right, so another way that the government can impact the labor market and the unemployment rate is through a minimum wage law. So a minimum wage law is just a law that says, hey, you need to pay your employees at least this much. And if the minimum wage is too high, specifically if it's higher than the equilibrium wage in the labor market, this can lead to a labor surplus. And what this means is that there would be more people seeking work than there are jobs available, and this would generate unemployment. So we'll show this on our graph here. So this is just a graph of the labor market. And in the labor market, we're looking at the quantity of labor and the price of labor we call the wage. And so just remember that in the labor market, the suppliers are the workers. They're supplying their labor to the firms who demand the labor to produce products. And so in this labor market, this is our equilibrium point right here. And this is our equilibrium quantity of labor and our equilibrium wage. So what this tells us is that when the market is at equilibrium, both workers and businesses are in agreement. The number of people who are seeking a job at this wage matches the number of jobs that firms are willing to provide at this wage. So if the government comes in and sets a new minimum wage that is above the equilibrium wage, so this WM here will be our minimum wage, what we'll see happen is that the quantity of people who are willing to work, so this is our QS, is going to be larger than the quantity of workers that firms want to employ. This is our QD. And so, as we see, when the minimum wage is set too high, this is going to lead to a surplus. And basically, this means that there's going to be some people who want to work but can't. So, those people would be considered unemployed. And a lot of economists are against these minimum wages being set too high because this generates some kind of inefficiency. We have people who are willing to work, but they're not able to find jobs because we've set the wage too high and disrupted the market. It's important to note, though, that minimum wages aren't all bad. Of course, minimum wages raise the wage that people receive, and this increases their standard of living by allowing them to consume more. Another component of the labor market that has a similar impact to minimum wages is unions or collective bargaining. So, unions are just groups of workers that band together and they work to collectively bargain with their employer, which means they're asking for, standards in their wages, usually higher wages, better benefits, better working conditions, all of these things. And so for the people who are part of the union, this is a great thing. This improves their working conditions so they, have better benefits, better policies that employers might otherwise not provide. And it also increases their wages, which of course is a benefit. However, for people who are not part of the union, this can be a negative consequence. So for people who are not employed by the union, this might mean that they're not able to get a job because, again, when the wage increases due to collective bargaining, there's going to be some people who want to work who will not be able to find a job. So typically we think of unions as being good for people who are in them, but they might not be good for people who are not part of the union. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through some practice problems. And we're going to do a couple of these because I want to illustrate the fact that there's a couple different ways to present these types of problems. And that really requires you to know these formulas inside and out. So our formulas are right up here. These are our three formulas that we'll need. And we're going to do a couple different problems. So in this first problem here, we have the total population, the population ages 16 and over, so our adult or working population. We have the employed population and the unemployed population. And we're asked to calculate the labor force, unemployment rate, and labor force participation rate. So we'll start with the labor force. And with each of these problems, we're just going to be applying the formula. So in this case, our labor force is our employed plus our unemployed. So we're going to have 98 million plus 6 million. So our labor force is 104 million. And with all these problems, just be careful about the units. You want to report your answers accurately in terms of the units that are given. Next, we're going to calculate the unemployment rate. So for this, we're going to take our unemployed population, divide it by our labor force, and multiply by 100. So our unemployed population is 6 million. Our labor force is 104 million. We'll multiply this by 100%. And that gives us an unemployment rate of about 5.77%. Next, we're going to calculate our labor force participation rate. And we'll take our labor force and divide it by our adult population. So that's 104 divided by 142 times 100%. And we get a labor force participation rate of 73.24%. All right. All right. In the second problem, you'll see that our given information is a little bit different. Now we have the number of employed people, the number of unemployed people, and the number of people who are not in the labor force. So thinking back to how we define these terms, we're going to first calculate our labor force. So this one is easy. This hasn't changed from the first problem. The labor force is equal to the employed plus the unemployed. So employed is 140.5 million. Unemployed is 9.3 million. And so that gives us a labor force of 149.8 million. Now we want to calculate our unemployment rate. So to do that, we'll take the number of unemployed people, 9.3 million, divided by our labor force, multiplied by 100, and we get an unemployment rate of about 6.21%. And then lastly, we want to calculate our labor force participation rate. And this is where we need to be comfortable knowing the definitions of our groups and our formulas, because our problem is not explicitly telling us how many people are in our adult population. But, as we showed in that diagram, we know that our adult population is made up of 3 categories: employed, unemployed, and not in labor force. So based on the information that we're given, we know that our adult population is just going to be equal to our employed plus our unemployed plus those who are not in the labor force. So our adult population is 230 million. Now we're ready to just go ahead and use our LFPR formula. So we're going to take our labor force divided by our total working age population, multiplied by 100. And we see that our LFPR in this case is 65.13%. So based on the information that you're given in these different problems, you may have to sort of reconfigure the formulas and use those definitions to perform the correct calculation. All right, so this will be our last practice problem for unemployment. And you'll see once again that our given information is presented differently. So instead of giving us information about the number of employed people, we get our adult population and our labor force participation rate of 75%. So for us to calculate our labor force, we need to be familiar with these definitions. So our labor force is just the portion of our adult population that is choosing to participate in the labor market. So what we can do here to calculate our labor force is we'll take our adult population, which is 42.5 million people, and we can multiply this by 75% or by 0.75. And this will tell us our total labor force, which is 31.875 million. So again, you need to be comfortable with both the formulas and the concepts, the definitions of each of these different groups. Next, we can calculate our unemployment rate. So we have an unemployed population of 2.5 million. We'll divide this by our labor force, which is 31.875 million, multiply by 100%. And we see that our unemployment rate in this case is 7.84%. So of course, in this problem, we won't calculate LFPR because it was already given to us. All right, that's it for this video. If you have any questions, please just send me an email. I'm more than happy to help you go over these problems or answer any questions you might have. All right, thank you.